Building. I would consider myself a fairly good builder. Not the best, but hey, can you tone it down a little? Building. I would consider myself a fairly good builder. Not the best, but okay. And I want to get better. So today, we're going to start a new series where I have to try and make the best builds I possibly can with these requirements. Number 1, builds are randomly chosen each episode. Number 2, none of the builds have to be the same style or theme. And most importantly of all, each new build must connect with previous builds in the world. So what does that mean? Well, if in one episode I have to build a castle and the next episode I have to build a spaceship, I'm not starting a new world. That castle now has to deal with a spaceship. So all this brings up one question. What are we building today? Well, since it's the first episode, I figure it's fair for me to at least choose the theme this time. And we're going to start out with a theme of a watermill. That sounds incredibly boring when I say it out loud. Okay, I do promise this will be fun. I know what I'm doing. Kind of. Now, I also realized the theme of a watermill is kind of an uncommon one, and some of you might not actually know what that is. Well, you know how there's a windmill? A watermill is just like that, but instead of using wind to spin a turbine, it's going to be flowing water. So, a water wheel. Okay, so of course, the big problem here is the fact that I can't build a watermill without water. Kind of obvious there. But this is why I decided to start out with a theme that seems so simple. Because for this build to look good, I'm gonna need a lot of terrain. So using World Edit, if I do a brush cylinder, we're gonna want to use sand here, and then I think if I do 5, 2, so this should have a radius of 5 and a height of 2. Which it does, because if I go underground, yep, there we go. And this is how to do terrain. Just spamming this. And the reason why we use sand in this situation is because sand falls, so we're not going to end up with a bunch of floating blocks. So the first step of this build is place a lot of sand. So let's start out this build and get placing this terrain. Okay, so I've kind of planned out this huge area here, and I actually think that this is not going to be big enough. It's kind of hard to predict until you actually build it. But what I am sort of envisioning is basically like this sort of background. I want the backdrop to be this huge mountain. Or maybe a better description might be, so like there's one huge peak here, and then it kind of like slopes down and then goes up to a smaller peak over there. I have no idea if that is making sense, but I'm going to see if I can get something along those lines. So for now, I just need to continue filling this in. And I'm actually going to increase the brush height to 5. Okay, so the area's filled in, but it's looking really flat, although I'm not gonna fix that now. The best thing that I've found with terrain is essentially just work with the large bits first, which in my case, of course, is this huge mountain that I want to do. So for me, I'm going to just build up a bunch of, oh god, my frame rate. For me, I'm gonna build up this large mountain using the larger cylinders like this, and then once there's a general shape, we can go in with the smaller bits. And that's where you sort of work out the finer details. And it's gonna look awful at first. It's gonna look like this. It kind of looks bad for like 90% of the process until you get to the final 10 where it sort of looks okay. So if you're doing something like this with me, just hang in there. Oh gosh, my shovel. It will look good eventually. Because again, we're only doing a rough shape here. This is always around the time where I really start wondering if it's gonna turn out good. And I just kind of have to remember that it will. Eventually. Hopefully. Okay, so I kind of want this mountain to be a bit leveled. So there's areas where it's a bit more flat rather than pointy. And I think this might actually be the first one. It wasn't really intentional. I just kind of ended up making a more flat area here. And I actually am kind of liking its positioning. I think I might try a similar sort of thing spreading. Oh gosh, my frames. I might try a similar sort sort of thing spreading out to around here, maybe? Because I think that this area here is sort of where I want to put the watermill. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so you know what? I am actually kind of liking the shape this has formed. I think, so of course, a watermill is going to need flowing water. In other words, a river. And I think a nice sort of shape for the river might be if it comes down here and then, of course, like flows this way and down there. And then, like, if it sort of curves around, we can put the watermill around here. But I need to, like, sort of smooth this slope out. So, like, that bit there can sort of remain as a cliff, but then I think sort of slope it down from there. So yeah, a bit like this. This is all still a cliff and stuff, but then just to the left of it, this is where it's gonna start sloping down gently. I think that might look cool. I need to extend the back of this a lot. It is way too small. Has been a while. Like, seriously, this has taken much longer than expected. In fact, it was so long that I ran out of time to record on the first day, so it's actually several days later. But the good news is we do now have a really nice shape for the mountain that I wanted. So what's the next step? Well, currently you can see this is really rough. Like, there's a lot of steep sort of slopes and stuff, and it just jumps up. It doesn't look very natural. So the way that I need to fix that is if I come down here, I can set the first position with World Edit. Then I need to fly all the way over to the other corner, which is actually going to be easier in spectator mode. Then around this point here, I can probably set position 2. And this is the really fun command to run, because if I do /smooth sand, we're going to need to wait a second. This takes a lot of processing, but what we should see, hopefully, as we go closer, there we go. The command's working. Look at that. So now all of this terrain has been smoothed out, and I could smooth it out more. Like, I can run that command several times, but I think running that just once has actually come out really well. So yeah, as you can see, a little comparison of the before and after, there is a huge difference there. And this next step might actually crash my game, because what we want to do next in order to make this mountain look nice, because of course currently it's just a huge pile of sand, what we need to do in order to make this area look nice is of course texture it with like grass and rocks and stuff. But the thing is, of course, grass doesn't really grow sideways. So let's say that I wanted to use moss as the main texture for like all of the greenery in this mountain. Now, of course, I could just go and paint the ground like this, and that looks perfectly fine on the flat areas like that. The problem comes when I need to paint areas like the side of it here, because this is not natural. Greenery wouldn't really grow at an angle like this. So the way to fix this is we need to get the top blocks of this entire area. So essentially what we want to do is select all of these blocks here on the surface, but anything below that, we don't want that. And the way that we are going to do that is by exploiting the function of grass. Because of course, as you know, if there's grass here, but then there's more blocks on top of that, this grass block will eventually just turn into dirt. Meaning if we replicate that on the scale of this entire mountain, we can set our brushes to figure out the top blocks. And the way to do this is run the very simple command to replace sand with grass blocks. And this is why it could crash my game, because it's about to replace that number of blocks. Oh, okay, it's somewhat working. It might take its time, and it might actually need me to just fly around the entire world to load in the chunks better. Okay, there we go. The game took a long time to process that, but I think it's now done. So our entire mountain is now made of grass blocks, and you can actually see the technique that I just explained already working. A lot of these grass blocks have already turned into dirt. That one just did. So essentially what we need to do right now is just wait for all of this to process. Maybe move around a bit so different chunks are loaded, but over time it should all work. We just need to play the waiting game for a bit. Okay, so it's been a bit of time, and by now, most of the grass has actually already turned into dirt, and it actually gives you a much easier perception on the scale and depth of this mountain. But of course, I can't leave it looking like this. This is way too plain. It doesn't really look that nice. Which is where painting comes in. Now, I'm not talking about paintings like this. I'm talking about actually painting the terrain. Again, using World Edit. So as you can see here, I've actually got sort of 2 block palettes, or I guess gradients is a better term. And they're not perfect, but they kind of fit the theme that I'm going for. So on the top here, we have all of these green blocks. This is what we're going to use instead of grass. And the reason why we're not using grass is because unfortunately it has this dirt texture on the side, and I can't use that. It would make the build look way too messy. So instead, we're replacing it with other green blocks such as like green wool, green concrete powder, and moss. And then that greenery ends up turning into mossy cobblestone, which is going to give it a nice rock texture, before we are actually going to put it more into these dirt sort of textures. However, we're also not using dirt blocks for a reason you might get to later. But anyway, so below that, we have a very sort of simple gradient. This is just light grey sort of stuff to very dark grey. It's subtle, but it's going to be used to give this whole mountain a little bit more contrast. So the way I'm going to start out painting this is actually just with a selection of blocks. We're not going to use the whole range at once. So what we're going to start out with is 25% green wool, 25% concrete powder, and then 25% moss. And we are now going to tell this brush to mask grass blocks, and this is how we are going to paint the surface, because as you can see, it is only affecting the grass blocks. The dirt underneath isn't painted. And we're going to go over the dirt blocks with deep slate later, which is why we also cannot use dirt in our gradient over there, because it would eventually get replaced with the deep slate. But what I'm going to do now is basically just go through, and everywhere where there should be some sort of grass, we're going to put this texture. And I get that up close, it might look really messy. Like, this might not look the best, but the thing is, we're not seeing this from this scale. We are seeing it from a scale all the way out here, and as you can see, it looks much better. So yeah, let's get to painting this grass. Okay, so the sun is rising, and you can already see that this looks way better. This is the advantage of fully green blocks, because of course, as I said, grass, it has a dirt texture mostly on the side. It just doesn't look that great, but when you have a block that is green all over, it looks so much nicer. But yeah, so what I have done is basically I've gone around, and everywhere where it's flat enough for grass to theoretically grow, I've painted this texture. However, even in these tiny little areas, it's just slightly too steep, so I didn't put any there. And that's an important part. If you do cover all of those tiny areas up, it doesn't really feel as tall, and it doesn't feel natural. A real mountain is going to have space. A real mountain is going to have areas where grass can't grow, as small as that area may be. Although I do notice this little area which should maybe have some. Okay, but now, as you can see, we have a fairly overgrown mountain, which is kind of the look that I'm going for. Because I don't think I've said it yet, but I'm kind of inspired by the Scottish Highlands, and like the mountains there, they don't really go above the clouds, and they are fairly covered in grass. So I've tried doing the same, where there are a lot of these little areas where it is smooth enough for stuff to grow. But now we're on to the next bit, and you might be wondering, like, what's happened to the rest of this gradient? Well, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not entirely sure. This is the thing, when you're making a large-scale project like this, you are allowed to change your mind. And I'm not entirely sure if I want to introduce all of this brown into this build. Like, it might contrast just a little bit too much with the really dark grey. So for now, I think I will leave it, but there's a chance I might come back to it. But this next bit is where we are actually going to be introducing the rock into our mountain, because currently it's just a lot of dirt. Now, I'm gonna do a similar thing to before, so we're going to do 25% deep slate, 50% cobbled deep slate, then we're gonna bring it down to 15% polished, and then just 10% deep slate bricks. And you might be thinking that's still only half the gradient. And you are correct, but we will get to that point in a little bit. I forgot to set this to mask dirt. Let's just undo that and slash mask dirt. And now what we're going to do is we are going to essentially trace around the lower half of this mountain. We're not going to go over the full thing. We're only going to do these lower down parts here. But there we go. That's the lower part of the mountain done. And you can still see I've left a lot of grass. So we can't get a great idea of what this looks like yet. Which is why I think I'm going to make the decision now. I'm not going to put the brown textures. So what we're going to do, we're going to run the same command again, but we're replacing grass blocks with air. And this is going to take a while to process. But as you can see, all of that grass is disappearing. And that now gives us a much clearer perspective on what we've made. And I am liking that. So yeah, as you can see, I have gone over the lower part of this mountain with this texture that we've made. But now here is where the gradient comes into place. Because the best way I can explain this, we're going to get another brush. And of course, on the previous brush, we used these 4 blocks here. What we're going to do now is we're going to shift it 1 to the right. So instead of starting with deep slate, we're actually going to start with cobbled deep slate and end with cracked deep slate bricks. So we use the same percentages, but we're just replacing the blocks we're using. And now, instead of going over the lowest part of the mountain, we're going to go over the lowest part that we haven't painted yet. So that is, of course, all of this dirt here. But now, essentially, what we have done is we have just shifted the whole tone ever so slightly darker. And it's only shifted a slight bit. Like, we've only swapped out 1 block, really. But, of course, over time, as you swap out more and more blocks, you're going to end up with a completely different color. A good way to put that into perspective is here is a sphere of the lightest brush color compared to the darkest brush color. The goal is to make this contrast much more gradual. But anyway, so we've painted the next bit, and now we're just going to repeat the process. Change out all the blocks, paint the next lowest part, and repeat this process until you reach the top. Okay, and here is where we have encountered a problem. So this netherite pickaxe here, this is the final brush, and I have actually already used it. You can see here there's some cracked deep slate tiles. That only appears on this brush. But the problem is, trying to keep a somewhat linear gradient has actually left me with this massive pile of dirt on top. And I could paint this with the exact same texture. But the thing is, then it would look like the top sort of texture extends way further than anywhere else on the mountain. And it can sometimes cause the build to feel a bit unbalanced. So, of course, what is the solution in this situation? Well, this command at the bottom is the current mixture that we're using. What we're going to do with it is just bring it from 4 blocks down to 3. So we're going to remove this 25% grey wool and instead just split that percentage between the other blocks. So I don't know, and maybe let's bring that up to 30 and then this up to 20. And now we paint the rest just like normal. But of course now we're using a higher quantity of the darker blocks. So we're continuing the gradient just with less variation. And really, when you get to a scale where it's this high up, you're not gonna notice much. And it is the finer details like this that I find actually make a build much better. And again, there's a bit of dirt left, so we'll remove this 50% and then just split it between the other 2 blocks. And I think at this point we can just finish off the mountain. Although, actually, I don't like that. I think that the variation of 2 blocks that were very similar didn't exactly look great. So instead of outright removing the 50%, I think we'll just bring it down a bit. So we'll bring it from 50 down to 25 and then add maybe like another 15% to deep slate tiles and another 10% to the cracked deep slate tiles. And then, yeah, I think this looks better. As I said, you're allowed to change your mind. But with that, we have now finished this mountain. Kind of. Because if you remember, the build theme here actually was not mountain. It was a watermill. This mountain was entirely just meant as a backdrop. Now, the thing is, I'm not entirely sure of the path of the river. I was originally thinking it should be like here or something, and then we have a waterfall coming down, and then it just flows down that way. I don't like that idea anymore. Because the thing is, rivers need a source. Like, you can't just have a waterfall coming out of nowhere. It's like the waterfall has to have enough place to gather water for it to then become a river. So yeah, when there's really not that much area above it, you wouldn't expect expect to see a great big flowing river here because there's simply just not enough area for the water to come from. But if we bring it down somewhere to around like here, maybe, it's still sort of stretching the limits of geography, but with a little bit of sort of creative freedom, you could imagine you might be able to collect enough water to get some sort of flowing stream here. And as long as you can get a stream, you can get enough to get a river later. So yeah, let's see if we can plan this out. Okay, here we go. I think I have a nice shape for a river picked out. So it sort of starts up here in a little pond. Again, it's unnatural, but yeah, there's not much we can really do with the space. So yeah, it starts up in this little pond, and then it does exactly what water should do. It follows the easiest path down. And luckily, it's very easy to work out the easiest path down, because most often it's just the steepest slope. So like right here, it could flow down that way, but there's a steeper slope here, so it goes there. And over here, maybe it could flow a bit more over that way, but there's a much steeper drop right there. And yeah, you essentially just do that, putting a little bit of randomization here and there, and it just kind of comes out looking like a river. And again, the thing to remember here is it doesn't have to be perfect. Nature is not always perfect. So really, just kind of keep working it until it looks somewhat natural. Don't worry about perfection with it. But anyway, so now I kind of just need to carve out this path. Okay, now I'm gonna take a bit of a risk here, because of course a lot of this is concrete powder, but if I put some water here, how much is this gonna flow down naturally? Because ideally it would follow the same path that we've carved out. It seems to be doing that quite well so far. It might, okay, no, it didn't flow into there. Still following its way down. Okay, that actually worked out much better than I thought it would. The water did mostly follow the path we set for it. I mean, there are a few points where it's sort of overflowing around the edge, but that's fine. It didn't like overflow out into the massive field here. That's all I was really worried about. Now, I'm not actually going to keep it as just water. I don't like the look of rivers when they are just made of it. I'm probably going to use glass in a lot of points. But as a quick sort of test just to see if it worked, it came out quite well. Now, actually, I'm a bit curious. What happens if I replace most of this water with ice? Because I'm trying to work out, can I sort of automatically fill a lot of this with water? And mainly, can I do it without breaking it? Oh, okay, that was something I was worried about. That is fine, that is fine. We can replace anything that turns into concrete with concrete powder later. Now, my question is there a way this is going to automatically melt? I might just need to go over it again. So if I just do this, not the best result. Okay, you know what? Apart from one point up there, that actually went extremely well. So apart from a few points where I just sort of need to smooth it out, I think our river is actually mostly done. Okay, there we go. I've done some fixing up on the river, and I think that is looking good. It's definitely not perfect, but I am really liking how it's looking, and I kind of don't want to ruin it. So finally, after all this time, we can actually begin on what the build theme was. But guys, I think it's time I let you in on a little secret. This video was not about how to build a watermill. Instead, I think this video works much more as a bit of an explanation on how to make terrain just fit a build. Or the other way around as well. How to make a build fit into the terrain. Because at the end of the day, all of this was really just kind of done to explain my build process when I come up with an idea. This video was pretty much a secretive way of talking to you guys about picking the location of a build. And if you don't have a location, then you can make it yourself. So yeah, maybe we should actually get to this water wheel. I'm gonna need to actually come up with a wheel design. Well, that's definitely not it. There we go, that's better. Still not great though. There we go, that's a bit better. I quite like that. It doesn't entirely feel right. There's something about the outer rim. Maybe it will look better when it's actually with a building in the water. Okay, yeah, you know what? It looks better when it's in the water. So now I just need a building for this. Okay, so with the water wheel actually built here, I think it's looking quite nice. The thing is, of course, you're not just gonna have a wheel like this out of nowhere. It kind of needs to be connected to a building. And I'm not entirely sure of the style of building that I want to go with for this. Although, one of the ideas that I have is maybe like a fantasy style building. So if any of you have ever seen the Lego Lord of the Rings sets, they actually have a really nice nice design. And the reason why I'm specifying Lego is because Lego's actually a really good place to get build ideas for Minecraft. Like, you can look at real buildings, of course, still, but Lego kind of has that style where it turns everything just a little bit more blocky. So it actually makes it much easier to look at and adapt into Minecraft. Just a little tip there for anyone that's curious. So yeah, what I think I'm gonna do is I might just chuck some stuff together and see if I can come up with something that might work. Okay, I'm quite liking this sort of shape that I've come up with here. So I'm thinking of maybe like a pointed roof this way, and then a smaller pointed roof on this bit, sort of connected in on the side. I have no idea if that makes sense. Hopefully it just works later, and then you can see what I mean. Also, I did put this little balcony area here, except I actually ended up putting a little indent in the ground here, because of course, with this being a water wheel, this bit would theoretically spin around. So, of course, to ensure that it has room to spin, you would need a little gap in the floor here. And actually, I kind of like the way it came out. And I've also sort of put this weird little sort of sewer intake here. I don't quite know what that would be for. It just felt like it should be there. But yeah, currently, I'm trying to sort of work out what sort of walls I might need for this. I'm thinking sandstone or some other pale block, but I'm not entirely sure, so I'm just going to need to work it out. Although, what I do think might be good is maybe a stone sort of trim at the bottom. So yeah, let's get to work on that. Okay, so I've put a little trim here, and you might notice there's a lot of texturing with stuff like moss and cobblestone when it really should just be stone bricks. The reason I've done that is because this build, it's out in the open, and theoretically, something that's like all the way out here, where there's no other civilization really, it's gonna experience a lot of weather. There's gonna be a lot of rain. It might even flood sometimes, given the fact that there's a river and a mountain here. So reasonably, you would expect a lot of damage to be done to this building, which is why I'm adding so much texture with materials that look a bit more broken. Like, it's one of those things that I think is really important to consider when you're actually building something. Essentially, how long has it been there and what has it gone through? So to me, I would say this building's probably gone through a lot of really harsh weather, and therefore it just results in a lot of damage being done. Anyway, let's continue with the build. Okay, there we go. I've filled in the walls, and I really am actually liking this. I do kind of wish there could be a more gradual gradient, because the lightest birchwood is still way darker than the darkest sandstone, and there's kind of nothing I can do about that. Basically, Minecraft is just limited in the blocks available. But the other thing you might notice is a lot of this texturing is actually focused quite heavily on the corners, particularly here. This, again, is due to weather. Again, it's just kind of how physics acts. So when you think about water, water's gonna get caught in the corners of things. So let's take this light blue wall and pretend it's water. Water's hitting this wall here, and it just kind of runs all the way down and then runs off. Maybe it gets caught a little bit on the ledge there, but other than that, it's fine. However, then let's think about water as it's coming towards the building and it hits the corner. So it lands in the corner here, but then it's got more friction because it's interacting with two different surfaces at once, so it sort of slows down a bit. It takes a lot longer to get down. And then, of course, like, you hit the ledge, you slow down even more, you spread out a bit, and you overflow off the edge. That water spent much more time on the wall, and because of that, it's of course damaged the wall a bit more. It's eroded it, it's sort of stained it, and that is why you'll notice a lot of these darker, more weathered textures are focused down in the corners or along the edges, whereas when you get to the middle, it's much smoother and it comes down much lower. You can also see it in this corner here, so of course you would have rain building up in this corner. You've also got rain flooding off of the land here. There's going to be much more dirt and debris coming from this way, so you're going to end up with much more damage in this corner than you are over there. That's the kind of stuff that's important to think about. But anyway, so moving on from that, I kind of need to get a roof done, and I think I'm gonna go with maybe blue. I will admit, I'm not sure, but as I said, I'm trying to go for some sort of fantasy Lord of the Rings elf style, so I think blue might be a nice colour for that. Plus, this might be a surprise, but I've actually never worked with copper, and a lot of people doing fantasy coloured roofs like this actually use copper, so I figure maybe I should try it for once. Plus, the advantage of it is also you have the stairs and the slabs, which gives you a bit more control over the shape of it, and then you also have all of the other stages of like how weathered it is, so you get a lot more texturing. So when it comes to this bit, I'm just kind of experimenting. I am not liking this. I don't like the shape of it. It just doesn't look right. Yep, I'm getting rid of this. What about prismarine? Oh, maybe I could use the warped stuff? Okay, looking online, a lot of people seem to use a block palette like this. And I think I'm gonna do the same. Because personally, I don't think I know a better way. Okay, I'm preferring this roof shape as well. I basically brought it out by one block on each side, which I didn't do before. Okay, it's definitely not perfect, but I am really preferring that to the previous design. I might still keep this as copper, I'm not entirely sure. Oddly, this feels a lot less blue now, comparing it to the roof here that is way more saturated. Let's try a little trim there. I feel like one of these needs to be a different width, but I don't see a way that that's possible. So I feel like either this wood needs to be wider or thinner, or the concrete below it needs to be wider or thinner. They can't really be at the same width, but there's no way of not having it like that. I could potentially try and do like a little bit of texturing or something. If I just add trapdoors randomly, you know what? That does kind of work. Yeah, you know what? That works. I think that actually does kind of do it. Okay, you know what? I actually really like that. I should probably do the interior. Okay, now here is where we're going to use a little bit of trickery. Because, of course, so the water wheel, this bit is spinning and it enters the wall at that height there. That height is on the floor when you come in here. So the way we're going to fix that is we're going to completely lie and we're going to put it up there. In fact, no, we'll go even a little bit higher. We'll put it around there. And to hide that transition even more, we might just put a door here. So, like, if we just take some birch or something so that it matches the wall, flip those up, and then put a door in here. I can't put a door there? Huh. I thought you could put doors on stairs. Well, if I put a door there, how does that... It's fine. Although, I think I'm gonna change it to a dark oak door. Yeah, you know what? That's fine. I might maybe put a little bit of detail around it. But basically, the reason why you're able to get away with this is because, of course, that is entering the wall higher than where you are entering the building. The gears are currently above your head. And the thing is, because you walk in here and you lose all perception of where that water wheel is, when you come up the stairs and go through the door, you're entirely fine with the gears suddenly being up there. It makes no logical sense, but because you have that transition in the form of a doorway here, you actually don't really consider it that much. So now we just sort of need to work out what's inside a mill, and that's something that I don't know. I have no idea how these things work. Okay, so it's a very basic interior, and it's definitely not one of my best, but to be honest, I kind of don't know what goes on in these buildings, and I don't really know the process of them. All I really know is they're probably doing something with hay. So yeah, we have our gear that comes in here, it connects to other gears, it's got chains and stuff that are lifting up more things. You got your boxes down in the corner, and then you've got your pile of hay, because everyone needs a pile of hay. But yeah, so with that, I'm leaving it behind. I don't like interiors. In fact, I'm gonna put another door on there for security. One thing that I am thinking is maybe it needs a little bit of decoration here or something. This feels blank. I wonder if maybe I can quickly make some sort of thing in the corners? Something like that? Maybe, you know what? I like that. Maybe make it feel a bit more solid with some trapdoors? Yeah. It's certainly not great, but I don't like it, no. Okay, what if instead of fences, we do actual blocks, or I guess stairs. Okay, better. And you know what? I think I will leave it like that. I quite like that. I just kind of wanted to remove some of the blank space there. For some reason, it doesn't feel right putting windows in it. Like, it just doesn't really work with the interior. But yeah, so there we go. The build that was definitely a watermill. We definitely did not focus on the mountain. That build is now done. Now, originally, I was going to add a bunch of trees around here and stuff, but I'm not entirely sure. I think the inclusion of trees here is going to entirely depend on the future builds. And speaking of future builds, now it is your turn. As I said in the intro, I got to choose the build for today, but now I want you guys to come up with some ideas. So please tell me down in the comments, firstly, what do you think of this build? I have just enabled shaders just to see what it looks like. What do you think of this build? And also, more importantly, what should should I build next? Because every build from here on, I want to come from you guys. So tell me in the comments, what do you guys want me to build next episode? And maybe, who knows, it could be yours that gets picked.